All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We have the crowd of people starting to filter in, but we're going to get this discussion started. So I just want to thank everyone for your attendance today, and a special thank you, of course, to our speakers who make these types of events possible, as well as our partner, the Canadian Medical Isotope Ecosystem, who is helping us put on this event. As many of you know, the CMIE was a result of some strong government action and investment into the isotope community through the Strategic Innovation Fund, and as a result have worked now alongside the CNIC on a number of events. One of which was our Leader Summit, for those of you who attended in June. But one of the key themes that came out of that Leader Summit was the recognition around the industry of why invest in isotopes, why now is the right time. And we actually had a special presentation at that event from Canadian billionaire Michael Lee Chin, who kind of outlined his investment reasons. But with the panel that we've assembled today, you will hear about some other reasons why people believe now is the right time to invest in isotopes. And through the great work that the CMIE is doing, through their their development fund, they are also investing in the community and making sure that early stage projects have access to the funding to kind of work on that next great isotope or medical treatment within the sector. So with that said, I am going to hand it over to Owen Roberts, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Probe Development and Commercialization. Owen was most recently the founder of and CEO of Noblex Biotech Inc., a Canadian biotech contract research organization focused on discovering and developing antibiotics to treat bacterial infections caused by drug-resistant bacteria. Owen, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you very much, and thank you, the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council, for inviting me, and also on behalf of the Canadian Medical Isotope Ecosystem, for which we're one of the co-leads. I'm very pleased to be here and to be your host today, and also to be joined with this very exceptional group of experienced Canadian investors. So I'm looking forward to diving into this topic of investing in isotopes. Why now, and why is this the right time? Before we dive in, this can be a very broad topic, but for the purposes of our conversation just today, we're going to discuss how our panelists would approach or evaluate or think about as they look at early seed or Series A investee opportunities that they come up to them. So our panelists today are Drago Burbsel from Portland Holdings, Damian Lamb from Genesis Capital, Lou Han from Lemira Ventures, and one of the first people I had the pleasure to meet back in my early days when I was out raising capital, Nancy Harrison from Amplitude Ventures. And so with this, and without much further ado, why don't we get right into it? Damian, I just thought I'd ask you, since I know in the radiopharmaceutical area, you were one of the early stage capital investors, and looked at Fusion back in 2014, so now over 10 years ago. Looking back at those days, how receptive was the investment community then, and what were the struggles as you took that company towards the public market?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Owen, and thanks for having me today on the panel. I mean, Fusion probably was a concept that sort of started to come into focus in about 2014, but it was really the work of prior 6 years of a thought exercise within the Center for Probe Development and Commercialization, which I sat on. I was one of the inaugural members of the board. John Valiant set up the CPDC, via the federal government's CSER program to commercialize some of the work that was being done at MAC, and specifically in his lab. And so Fusion was kind of what came out of that, targeted alpha radiopharmaceuticals and harnessing some of the capabilities that John had and that existed within the Hamilton Health region and within McMaster. So we went back and forth on different ideas and thoughts over that period of time, and probably 2014, 2015 sort of settled on that targeted alpha was probably something that we thought we might be able to raise, or I thought we might be able to raise money around about. And, probably the major, uh, uh, watershed point for that was we had a board member from Johnson & Johnson Innovations who had a background in radiopharma. He joined the board of CPDC, and he got quite excited about what we were doing, and introduced it to J&J, and then ultimately made its way to JJDC. And between them and us, we started working on putting together that financing, which turned out to be a $46 million US sort of seed round. But it came in sort of two chunks. It was our seed/Series A. It was, ourselves, JJDC, Adam Street, TPG, and I'm trying to think who else. Oh, HealthCap was in that first group, and then we expanded it beyond that. Actually, Adam Street may come in the second one, but that really is what got us up and running at the time. Was it hard? Yeah, it was hard, but I think once we got sort of US sponsorship, that helped a lot. You must remember, and I'm trying to sort of manage time here. Radio Pharma wasn't new, but it hadn't really worked in its first iteration, or it really hadn't had booming success. I mean, Bexar and Zevalin, I think, had been launched, 14, 15 years before without any great success, largely because the infrastructure didn't exist to deliver those therapies. The infrastructure that was required for alpha was significantly less, and we're probably on the back of Xofigo, which had been approved by Algate and then launched by Bayer. And relatively quickly, people were realizing this was a different generation of radiopharma. So, I think once we got that first round done, things became infinitely easier. As we moved towards that Fusion was always a company that probably was going to require public capital to fully realize its potential. And, as we went towards the Series B, we thought about, how do we get the type of sponsorship or pedigree that we needed to attract the best banks and ultimately get public, on a major exchange. And that's when we brought in OrbiMed, and Varian, who led the Series B, and Perceptive, Rockspring, CPPIB sort of all came into that range. So it was really building a syndicate of investors who could provide you sponsorship and pedigree to get your IPO done. And so the Series B kind of was the building block, the foundation that we laid for the IPO, which we did in 2020. And I sort of sat as chair of the board through that whole process from the inception of the company through the IPO. I stepped down in the fall of, I think we took it public in June. I stepped down in the fall of 2020.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Nancy, I know that with Amplitude Ventures, you were a very early investor in Abdera Therapeutics, which, and you sit on the board with them, etc., and you help raise capital for them. Now, in Damien's example from something 10 years ago, where it seemed like one of the key drivers was the engagement of getting pharma in very early on at that time, and then some of the other experiences he had 10 years ago and going on. Have you seen things change more for when the experience you had with Abdera? Was the environment more accepting or more experienced? What was your experience like recently with Abdera?
Right. Thanks, Owen. And I guess your earlier comment just means I'm the oldest one on the panel. Great.
No, I think
I'm teasing. So similar stories. Some parts of the story are similar to Damien. As you said, we were the early investor in Abdera. I sit on the board of Edmare, and so was watching Abdera be incubated inside Edmare. And it was really that catalyst of thinking about the generations of companies like Fusion, and where did we think the spaces existed to be a further refined antibody platform. So it's still in the antibody space, but using very targeted portions of antibodies to get around some of the worries that we have of larger antibody platforms in this space. So we incubated it together and then went out with an A, and that A grew relatively quickly. We had the ability to partner with Abcelera at the beginning, and they were both an investor and a partner to give us the antibodies that we wanted, or the ligands. And so we were able to move pretty quickly and closed an A that was never publicly disclosed because we stayed in stealth. And then, well, we had interest. The big things that I would say are different is when Damien was putting Fusion together, pharma was interested, but to his point, that was kind of the first next generation. By the time we were doing Abdera, lots of people were moving in lots of different ways: peptides, small molecules, antibodies. And so pharma was interested and still watching, not necessarily coming to partner in the way that they are now. So we decided to stay stealth for a while, a couple of years, and then we did a B, which included very strategic, along the lines of what Damien spoke about, very strategic US VCs. So we already were in the deal with Versant, Abcelera, and Admari. We then went and found Venbio, Viking, Quming, RTW. So we put together a very strong syndicate. I helped, but it's really the team that did that, and helped by their investors. And so that's a very knowledgeable group of investors with very deep pockets that allows us to take our products into the clinic. So we've disclosed that they've filed the phase 1, and we should start dosing patients, as soon as we get all the logistics that go with these therapies in place. So it's a pretty exciting year for Abdera. I think that people just understand this space more than when Damien and Fusion were raising that A. Obviously, there's been a ton of partnering, M&A, development in the space, sales. So people can look at revenue and how fast that revenue is growing. So I think there's less about having to prove the space, more about defining how you differentiate in the space from others, and thinking about what pharma will want as they put their buckets of products together, skill sets and products.
Thanks. That's very interesting. It's in some ways it shows how you have to start thinking about bringing in the larger strategic investors, because this is a very capital intensive business. You're going to need those Series B investors to get you into the clinic to fund these kinds of studies and get them out there. Dragos, your involvement with Portland Investment Council, sorry, you've looked at a number of companies, not just in at the medical product, but also in the space of et cetera. How do you view, when you're looking at different companies at different points, some which might be an isotope manufacturer or a diagnostic or a therapeutic, et cetera, or other places in this chain, how do you view the relative value of these different products when you're looking at and trying to think about the value for some of these companies?
Well, thank you, Owen, and I'd like to thank CNIC and CMIE for having us here. I'd like to take a minute before I dive into your question, just take a minute to tell the people on the call that may be less familiar with Portland Investment Council, especially our role as an investor in the space, right? I'm Dragos Merbisol. I'm a portfolio manager with Portland Investment Council, and I'm a co-lead on the company's file insofar investing in radiopharma opportunities, both on the private side of things and the public sector. We're coming from a different place, and we're not your typical venture capital investor, obviously. We have a pedigree of being an asset manager first and foremost, right? So when we approached the sector, we built our knowledge and our portfolio organically, so one name at a time, and sort of concentrically stepping out of our comfort zone, layering on new holdings. And then to this day, we're over $250 million invested in the sector. Notable investments we made in the past 6 years are multiple rounds in ITMSC of Germany, critical supplier of lutetium-177, as everybody knows, as well as being a lead in a private placement of for Telix, a much smaller company at the time in 2019. As well as a couple of private placements in another German company utilizing radium-188 for topical treatment of non-melanoma skin cancers. And lastly, shout out to Radiomedics, who just last week announced an important collaboration agreement with Sanofi, bringing that large pharma into the game by licensing the development of what we think is going to be the first-in-class alpha therapeutic in the world. Beyond that, we have a liquid alternative fund, which at the core has targeted radiotherapy companies. That fund is uniquely focused on precision oncology in its sort of therapeutic, diagnostic, and supply incarnations, right? And coming to your question, we do think that obviously therapeutics have the potential of providing the largest benefit to patients, but also to the investors, right? So consequently, our largest allocation among the continuum from private to public has been to companies with a robust pipeline of therapeutics, right? And I'm sure we'll dive more into the details as to what might constitute an attractive therapeutic program. But beyond that, diagnostics, of course, have a strategic role in combination with therapeutics, right? I mean, let's not forget this industry coined the term of theranostics, right? It's that important to have a diagnostic in your pair. And the reason for that is, of course, one is so you can take the go-to-market approach. It gives you a good first foot in the door. Having a diagnostic, it's in theory might be a lower regulatory threshold to meet and give you that first foot in the door. Some companies are keen to have the metallic pair, right? And I think our own investee company, Radiomedics, with lead-203 led to 12, and our other investee company, Clarity, with copper-64, copper-67. So then it makes sense that you are seeking to develop the diagnostic and therapeutics at the same time. And we value that approach, of course, but first and foremost, what we like about diagnostics is the predictive nature, right? And the fact that if you see it, you can treat it, right? So we think this actually is what's making the industry so attractive nowadays, obviously, because when we think of this in the terms of difference between perception and reality, right? All the companies developing radiopharma or most of them tend to focus on oncology. Clinical development companies are perceived as particularly risky. We think having the ability to have a diagnostic that gives some prediction as to how the therapeutic might go actually helps mitigate some of that risk and potentially accelerate the approval process, which is something we've been keen to take advantage of as investors, and so far done well by it. Beyond on the supply side, obviously supply is probably more important in radiopharma than in other parts of the clinical development and commercialization continuum. I'm sure we'll talk more about this as well, perhaps. There's obviously, from the point of view of a potential investee company, having manufacturing abilities provides a de-risking feature. It's enough to think about some of the supply mishaps in the last couple of years. But also the cash flows are nice too, right? So we appreciate that. Having a robust manufacturing or supply business from the point of view of vertical integration also has the benefit of giving some de-risking capabilities through the cash flows generated.
Thanks very much. It covered off quite a bit of the topic, and also gave me also a lot to think about as well at the same time. Lou, from your perspective and at Lumera, as you look at the companies that you've been approached by or you're looking at, what kind of unique value propositions or characteristics make a company stand out for you?
Thank you for the question, and thanks for the opportunity to join this fantastic panel here. I think like Damien and Nancy, that we witnessed the sort of a renaissance of the radio space, really in the past decade. The concept of radiation therapy is not really new. I mean, we have external strategy to radiate tumors, and the really is how do you do that locally and precisely. And then, the first generation company is demonstrate that, and with the commitment from the pharma, demonstrate that there's a business model there, and clearly there's clinical value for this new class of modality of therapeutics. Then the question is, how do you differentiate yourself in the next wave of products? I think when somebody's starting a company in this business today, they got to ask themselves, what is the rationale to pick your binder? What is the rationale to pick your linker? And what's the rationale to put all these together to build an asset that's expensive to develop, not easy to commercialize? All these things comes down to you have to have a truly differentiated product at the end of the day. I think we mentioned about capital investment in the space. At the end of the day, everything that you do supports that clinical data generation. So the investment, let's say the infrastructure, if that helps you to gain efficiency in your development program, that sounds like a good thing to do. Again, not just to be differentiated from your peers for the reason that you have a lab, but actually helps you to increase that efficiency from the idea to the lead to the clinic. Not rely on perhaps too much external restrictions, a CRO time and all that. So again, somebody going into the space today where we see successive examples of acquisitions into big pharma. Now to think about just yet another same target with no clear differentiation or rationale why you need to develop it, be the fifth or sixth in the pipeline without clear differentiation, I think in general, not a good idea in biotech, and in radio is no exception. So I think, for entrepreneurs that's starting programs today in this market, you really have to very quickly articulate clearly to your investor that why are you doing this? What's the unique differentiation here? Is this something you understand the biology differently, or this is some new way to build this particular asset that has some unique features to de-risk the issues that today in the clinic. So it is now becomes much more nuanced space than the first generation of products.
Thanks very much. I appreciate everyone's thoughts on these different topics and questions. Before I move to some of the overall panel questions, I'd just like to remind people that for the last 15 minutes of the conversation, we're happy to take questions from the audience. So please feel free, I think, in the Q&A box or in the chat box to send a message and questions that you may have. And with the last 15 minutes, we'll try to have the panel review them, answer them. But in the meantime, I have 20 more minutes that I get to ask my own questions, so I'm going to be selfishly getting in on here. This made a list of quite a few things here, but I'm going to try and feed off a little bit about what Lou was just saying here, the unique, trying to get a unique profile for your product. That's one thing that early stage company creators and radiopharmaceutical leadership teams need to focus on. But from your views from the team, what other things, predominantly in radiopharmaceuticals, but maybe in others, do your portfolio companies or companies that you look at are common mistakes that they might make or things that they might overlook when they are starting to put a company together and a company proposal together? I don't know if anyone wants to give some experiences about some of the things that they've had or seen in the past on that. Nancy, I don't know, you look like you have a thought.
Sure, I'm happy to start. I think just continuing on with what Lou talked about, we see a lot of companies and a lot, including ourselves, who fall in love with science. And science is great, and we all love science. Yet it has to solve a medical need. One of the things that I really love about radiopharmaceuticals is they're very elegant in one way, especially this next generation, where they're looking for tumor uptake, specificity of organ, etc. And yet the other side of it is brute force, right? We're going to deliver an isotope and we're going to blast our way through that tumor. And so it's both elegant and brute force at the same time. I think a lot of the science people fall in love with the ligands, the linkers, all these different complex parts, as Lou talked about. They forget to think about which is the patient that has the need. And the oncology space is so complex right now, with a lot of products in clinic for various targets, that one has to think about what are the unique targets you can access with that methodology. And also, we're starting to really see a lot of the companies, not just in antibody space or small molecule space, have to think about combinations. So how are you going to actually provide a patient a therapy that they might not see that's going to be beneficial beyond what they currently have access to? How are you going to get that to the patient, which in this case we talked about is logistically challenging? And how are you going to show that it has benefit over standard of care, and not have to do those combinations and be not in a target that maybe other people can be in? So it's the uniqueness of that therapy for a patient that I think really we see people, including ourselves, with platform companies, really need to do a lot of heavy lifting to understand the right targets to go after at the right time.
Thanks. I don't know if anyone else wants to add some comments to that. If they have some, Damien, if you want to mention some common mistakes you see people make.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nancy hit on a number of interesting points that I think, well, one, I think mistakes that people often make is assuming that the same set of environmental or market factors still exist that existed when the first generation of companies had success. And that's not the case, right? Like, I mean, many of the big pharma companies that have an interest in radiopharma now have facilities and people to manufacture and deliver product. So, it doesn't mean another manufacturing facility can't be built, but it's not like it was, 10 years ago when we first started thinking about this, when we really didn't have a whole lot of choice because we had to make our own product. There wasn't any other choice. And build the supply chain and the logistics to put all that stuff together and get it into patients' hands. And the CBDC was a great vehicle to do that. But those things have changed. Some of the things that haven't changed is, the scarcity of isotope. I mean, actinium is still quite a difficult isotope to get, and we've already seen companies discontinue clinical programs because of lack of isotope availability. And I sit on the board of the other CDMO that we spun a company out, and risk factors that we have identified for programs that are in our pipeline are availability. Does the company have access to isotope supply? And not everybody does. So I think that's one mistake. I think the other is, you know, and this is the case, radiopharma or other, is there is no silver bullet in oncology. You know, I mean, there hasn't been, you know, monoclonal antibodies one, antisense wasn't, ADCs one, and IO isn't, and neither will radiopharma. You know, I think ultimately, you know, we did a lot of early work with infusion and combination studies with, you know, DDRIs. That was actually a big part of the impetus for AZ to partner with us initially, was some of the compelling data we had with DDRIs and also IO. Like we you know, we did some early work in IO where we saw, you know, being able to use subtherapeutic doses of both the IO and the radiopharma, get a, you know, complete tumor kill and a vaccine effect. And we actually patented that approach because it was non-obvious. And I think, you know, if I think about oncology and radiopharma, it's going to be part of a package that ultimately, you know, addresses that severe unmet medical need that exists within oncology. You know, we still see products approved that increase survival times by 3 months. I mean, I'm not sure that's really all that compelling when, when you're given the amount of money that's being charged for these products, and we have to do better. And I think thinking about that, you know, more broadly is probably going to be a requirement for companies as they go out to finance in this new market. How do you fit into that broader armamentarium of oncolytic agents?
Yeah, Drago, please.
Yeah, I mean, obviously from our point of view, there's a host of issues that you can make as an early player in the field, and I couldn't agree more with Damien. I know, trying to borrow the playbook of previous successes, it's probably a pretty guaranteed way of making mistakes, right? No situation is the same. The strengths has to come from, and obviously Nancy mentioned this as well. No, trying to be the nth of a kind in a very crowded field is usually not fraught with peril. And we say this, you know, we've seen this way too often from our, you know, perspective as prospective investors in earlier companies. The cure to some of this is, of course, have a clear mission as to what problem you're trying to solve, right? As opposed to, you know, as Nancy said, as opposed to being, you know, enamored with the science. You know, have a clear vision of what's the problem that you're trying to solve, and have assembled the right team. Pay attention to early capital allocation, right? You know, it's nice to have, you know, gold-plated facilities. You know, that seemed to be the playbook over the last little while, right? That attracted the interest of large pharma, or at least seemed to be increasing the value of potential M&A targets. We're not convinced that that's necessarily a must, right? So I'm not sure that that playbook is going to continue to be successful going forward. We very much like companies which are good at, you know, building the IP stack and the data stack, and stay focused on their strengths as opposed to trying to pursue too many things at the same time. And which brings me to my next gripe about early startups, is to make sure that you stay focused and you don't have an excessively large pipeline of opportunities that you're seeking to chase. And I could probably come up with a few more, but I'll stop here. One other thing actually that we like to see is folks who are humble and reach out for advice and seek sponsorship, is what I was used around here. We call it parentage, right? From people that have been successful in the industry, right? And be candid, be transparent about what it is we're trying to achieve, right? And don't try to be too many things to too many people.
Yeah, I can speak from experience from the back in the biotech bubble days when I first got started off, and we all ran out and built huge facilities with all this money, and then proceeded to tear most of it down just 2 or 3 years later. So, I mean, being very careful with your capital is very important, but it's a hard balance in this space right now, I think, because you know, there's not a lot of radiopharmaceuticals chemistry space available. It's expensive, it's long line, etc. Lou, do you have thoughts about how you go about your thoughts on, is there, capital intensiveness versus trying to do on a CRO basis in this stage, in this field?
Well, I think it's every company is unique, but at the end of the day, if there is a clear correlation between building a facility that can help you to streamline your product development and accelerate the process, so you don't have to, and more flexible in terms of troubleshooting for your next lead. I think there's reason to invest in infrastructure, but again, like you mentioned, you got to be careful because these are big ticket items that you easily can spend quite a bit capital into. But in terms of common mistakes, I think entrepreneurs could make in the space. I mean, the space has been changed materially, like since our investment in Fusion when I was still in Toronto, and now I'm in Vancouver. And one of the things people have to realize is oncology has a lot of different other modalities in development. It's one of the most rapidly developing landscape probably in the therapeutic area. So your competition is obviously not limited to your radio peers. You have ADCs coming, you have other modalities that are rapidly progressing. So from that standpoint, people have to make sure that they have a full understanding of what's happening in that treatment landscape for your particular cancer, of your favorite cancer. Does that make sense to fit in a very busy landscape, yet another complicated therapeutics? Again, that's something worth to spend a little bit more time to think about. And then last thing I'll say is IP. Oftentimes people think that, well, radio, its IP is definitely everywhere. While if you look deeper, it's not necessarily the case. So, at the very beginning, think about how you protect your IP with a thoughtful strategy. Obviously not just for radio, but for biotech in general. We'll be spending some time with your IP attorney just to strategize that out. Will be worthwhile for your time.
Thanks very much. So much of our audience is obviously located in Canada, or small startups or medium-sized startups in Canada who are either early stage raising capital in a seed, maybe gone to the A round, etc. Maybe just operating under a SAFE right now at this time is being funded, or government grants. As they put their seed and their A rounds together, how should they be thinking, and when should they be thinking about expanding or bringing in or reaching out to more investors on a global scale? All of you have mentioned that early on your investments brought in not just Canadians, but you built a syndicate, a larger syndicate. When should they start approaching or talking to, or should they work just with the Canadian people they start with? First, Damien, if you have some thoughts you'd like to share on people's paths for raising capital.
Yeah, you should start right away. I mean, capital markets are global. I mean, you shouldn't be focused on just Canada. If you're focused on just Canada, you've got, I don't know, 5 doors to knock on. Like it's,
and we have 4 of them here.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of doing yourself to failure if that's your approach. So yeah, I think you need to start talking to a broad array of investors on day one, and it may not translate into participation in your seed or Series A, but that doesn't matter. I mean, most investors who participate in financings, quite often it's not the first time they've seen the company. They've tracked it and watched what they've done and accomplished. I know, we saw OrbiMed in, when we did the Series A round, we saw who else came in there. We had been talking to CPP, IB. I mean, I had introduced the deal to Paul McCracken at CPBIB, you know, 3 years before they participated. I mean, people take time. It's like, you know, it's making an investment is a big commitment. And so, yeah, start as early as possible and don't get upset when people say no, because it's an investment in your future. If you can get sponsorship in the Canadian community, somebody that has a history of being able to build global syndicates, that's great. I mean, that's what we did with Inversigo. I mean, Inversigo, not radiopharma, but, you know, one of the other big sort of headline grabbing deals of the last 12 months. You know, that was a home built syndicate for the seed round, whereas Fusion was international. You know, both can work, but you should be talking to everybody as early as possible. Or if you're not doing your job.
Yeah, I'd also add not just investors, right? These companies are developing therapies for the world, and usually, unfortunately, they don't come to Canada for a very long time. So we are developing drugs for people around the world. And that means we need to find scientists around the world to give input. We need to find people, and you know, there's lots of ways to build that support system, mentoring system, scientific advisory boards, etc. But it's really important to have a global sense because we're developing global products. And anybody who just sort of focuses in their little station will not see everything that they need to see.
Interesting point from our point of view. Obviously, we're probably a good illustration of the notion of how global the flows are, and fully agree with Damien. As capital is obviously particularly fungible. So whereas certain assets are more tied to the geography, capital is the one that these that flows around, and we ourselves we're geography agnostic. Our investments are Germany, US, Australia, the largest, right? And we had investments in Canada as well, a company that used to be public and private now. I would, but it brings to mind the broader, I think, challenges around the Canadian ecosystem of radiopharma, right? Obviously, there's a number of assets that Canada has. All the strong fleet of CANDU reactors suitable for irradiation services. A long track record of good manufacturing practices in radiopharma. Highly qualified personnel, clinical services, and so on and so forth. Right. What we seem to be lacking is, unfortunately, the end market, right? Canada is not a meaningful end market for radiopharma, and for various reasons we can unpack that as well. So then necessarily, as Nancy said, the Canadian industry, the Canadian radiopharma entrepreneurs need to be geared towards external, right? You need to tailor your programs to reach a global audience, US at the very least, but a global audience, and therefore why not reach out for capital globally as well. One other point I would want to add here is that insofar as our own fundraising model is concerned, we're taking a bit of an unorthodox approach, and we set up special purpose vehicles in many instances to facilitate conduit capital into our investee companies. And what's happening is we had an opportunity and an honor, quite frankly, to be the ones advocating for the industry alongside entities such as obviously CNIC and CMIE, to the point at which there's thousands of Canadians who can be counted among supporters of the industry, right, through our fundraising efforts, and who have a increasingly better, we hope, understanding of the opportunities and challenges in the industry as well. And that should, I think, would continue to come to fruition and help support the industry in Canada as it moves through the next stages.
Thanks. Lou, yeah, please. I think you had a comment there as well.
Yeah, look, it's we're a Canadian fund, but we lead deals both in the US and Canada, and if we're talking about a company building based on Canadian science, obviously we'd love to see the company stay in Canada, grow in Canada. I mean, the science is supported by all the taxpayers on this call. So, you know, it's good to see the company stay in Canada. And I don't think there's a version of pitch deck to Canadian investors versus a pitch deck for other investors. I mean, you know, you have to be competitive globally. You know, everybody's is doing the same type of diligence. They're looking at what's out there on the global market. So you know, the earlier you can talk to them, get feedbacks. You know, no from investors means not yet, right? Not now. So don't take it personally and just keep going, get feedbacks, get a next version of presentation and move on. Like that's the life of a CEO, I guess.
Yes, yes. I can tell you that I think we did 50 pitches to get 3 investors back in 2007. And you just needed 3. That's all you got to remember. You just need 3 or 4.
The good old days.
Yeah, fair
You
enough.
only need 50 pitches to get 3 investors.
So, and we go from there. Look, I just want to remind people out there, we are getting a couple questions coming in, but please feel free to post your questions if you have any. We'd love to make this as interactive as possible over the next few moments that we have here. Drago, you have, I'll start you off with this one because you have a portfolio that covers quite a broad area. And I'm curious about how many, we've been talking a lot about the pharmaceutical side, but I'm curious about the isotope actual manufacturing side, or, you know, there's a scarcity of isotopes out there. Damien and Nancy have both mentioned how this has been a struggle for some of their portfolio companies to make sure they have them. How do you view that as an opportunity as an investor?
Yeah, it's by and large where we started as investors, right? We were the major supplier in the industry, and we were keenly aware, as everybody else here on the screen, of the challenges for the industry. And so we have an interest, right? And we're quite selective. We're quite selective in our interest. But I want to sort of raise another area of sort of another alarm, which is it would be a mistake for anybody involved in the industry to think that somebody's supply issues are just that company's or group of companies' supply issue, right? And it was good to see when Novartis had the manufacturing issues. It wasn't an isotope supply issue. I want to make that clear, but they had manufacturing issues with Pluvicto early on, sort of the first couple of quarters of 2023, radio labeling services, and it was good to see DSN MMI, for instance, taking a stance and getting all everybody around, you know, huddle up and support Novartis in their efforts to get their 2 facilities, the one in New Jersey in particular, approved by the FDA and shorten the period of time during which Pluvicto had was supply challenge, right? And I think that comes from the right place because reputational risk is probably one of the biggest or maybe underestimated risks for the industry. I would think it'd be wrong to think that success is assured. I think the industry is, well, as it's shaping up to be the 4th pillar of oncology, it still needs to earn the trust of medical oncologists, right? To kind of barely scratching the surface there. Obviously, no, there's a lot more to grow into that area and, you know, become a tool of choice in the toolbox of the medical oncologist. And there's instances such as the supply disruption with Novartis, Pluvicto, and more recently the program that I think Damien alluded to that needed to be at least put on hold for lack of actinium. That might actually cause the users of the radiopharma product to be less enthusiastic about adopting it, right? So I think that's a clear problem. So then, in that context, supply chain, starting with radioisotope, needs to be very robust, right? And again, it's not a foregone conclusion that it's like that. We had clear examples to the contrary. We are very proud to be associated with ITM, who has been, a tremendous industry enabler, and obviously involved in many with many Canadian entities insofar as radiation services and engineering and so on. We would love to see more companies, grow to the level of being able to deliver tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and ultimately millions of patient doses of radioisotopes, right, of all stripes. I think Lake Liston right now is involved in about 2/3 of the clinical development programs, and obviously there's a number of other radioisotopes of note and worth that need to be made available, and you can't have enough redundancy. So therefore, we're supportive of efforts to have more radioisotopes available. At the same time, you need to be, from the point of view of an investor, you need to be selective, right? You need to understand that there's going to be some excess capacity at some point in time, and also you need to understand there's challenges insofar as tooling up the facility and staffing up a facility. Building and some equipment a manufacturing facility does not make, as I think we learned painfully recently. So there's challenges. There's hope. I mean, but the industry needs all this the vastness of supply chain and plenty of redundancy within it, embedded in it, to be successful and be able to support the several dozen products currently in the pipeline, which we hope will become commercial.
Damien, thank you very much. Damien, did you have a comment you wanted to add in from your experiences with fusion, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, nothing. Just briefly, I think hopefully, I think the lutetium supply chain is reasonably strong today, and I hope a lot of the first generation of this next generation of radiopharmaceutical products are lutetium based. So hopefully that keeps the market interested and excited until we solve the actinium supply chain issue. I mean, that was a big part of the work we did early in fusion, and that was John Valiant, because he just knew how difficult it was to get, and he insisted and pushed and to make sure that we had in place what we needed to have enough actinium to build the products we wanted to build. And I think that supply chain within fusion was a big part of the driver, that and manufacturing for AstraZeneca to move from product development partner to acquired. But it's going to take some time for the actinium supply chain to catch up to the demand, and there will be more product delays, no doubt. Like, I can pretty much guarantee it. Like, there will be products that will be put on hold because they cannot get enough actinium to drive them into the clinic.
Yeah, we hear that quite a bit, and it's unique to this space that the supply of the key element of your product is actually quite constrained here, especially as everyone seems to be moving a mass of interesting and exciting phase 1 products into the clinic, or programs in the clinic. The question is again and again asked, where are these isotopes going to come from? And I'll add my own 2 cents here. I think there's more and more questions about a lot of programs are moved forward simply with an isotope, simply because that was the one that was available, not really thinking about whether it was the best one for the product. And I think that might be a question that comes up later. I think that's one as people here who are on the line should think about as well when they go to an investor or they go to a regulator, et cetera, or talk further down. It's like, you can't just tell people over the next couple of years, you can't expect to just say, we picked lutetium because it was available. You have to have a better answer than that. It may be the right one, but you should have a better answer to that. And Nancy, if you want to add something to there.
Yeah, the last part of the sort of logistics or supply chain that we haven't really touched on is when I think you were talking about on holds. It's not just the supply chain of the isotope. One really needs to think in the timelines of clinical development where the sites are that can actually run these trials and recruit these kinds of patients, because the logistics of having this product, building this product, and disposing of this product in a clinical setting for a lot of these centers is quite unique. And so that means that not every center is available to you. And that's part of the reason why in Canada we haven't been seeing a lot of these trials so far. So, just one needs to keep that in mind, that there's supply chain, there's manufacturing, and there's just fundamental logistics of moving these products around when they're hot. So, and assembling them so that they can be dosed to patients. That's an added complexity that means the timelines are a little bit longer and a little bit more arduous than people might expect.
Yeah, and that was a big part of why the first generation products didn't have the success that their efficacy would have warranted, was logistics and the ability to actually dose them in enough centers to make them relevant in the broader sort of oncology framework. So I think that's absolutely true, and probably more so with beta emitters than alpha. Like, I mean, alpha is a bit more tractable, just because it's, I think there are now 1,200 centers in the US that can dose Xofigo, because the shielding and the various other requirements are just less than what they would be with longer path particles.
So I see that Andrew has reappeared magically onto our screens again, which reminds us that we're coming to the close of our webinar and our discussion. I would like to, with the last 2 minutes I had before I have to hand this back to Andrew, there were a couple questions. I'm going to paraphrase one of the ones that came in. Is, if you had to, we've talked about a lot of risks here. Have we missed one that's on your mind, from regulatory or efficacy or safety or cost of therapy? Is there any one that we probably would have skipped over that's on your mind and said, you should have thought of this? And I don't know, Lou, if I can put you on the spot for this in the last second, but if there's one that we've missed that you think we should have thought of, what have I missed?
I think we covered pretty well here. The only thing I would think that as now people venturing into new isotopes, different type of isotopes, think about how long would it require to actually have a logistic chain to actually distribute these products. Won't happen overnight. It's happening, but it will take some time. So you might want to pick your POC with a product that's easier logistically distributed today.
Thank you. And before I hand it over to Andrew, just to wrap up for the day, I just want to take one more moment to thank everyone for joining us, in particular the members of the panel who made my life very easy. Damian Lamb from Genesis Capital, who has been my boss on and off now for almost 25 years. Nancy Harrison, who I mentioned previously, was one of the first people I showed a pitch deck to, and she rightly turned it down. But I bounced back with the next one, and I was one of these people who learned from my mistakes and tried to improve things, and eventually found a receptive audience with my ideas. Gerardo, it's been a pleasure to meet you, and Lou, I look forward to working with you and talking to you more in the future. So, Andrew, thank you very much for having me on, and thank you everyone who's listening to the show.
Yeah, thanks again, Owen, for moderating that discussion on behalf of the CMIE, and obviously thank you to their partnership for helping to deliver this event. The CMIE is obviously a critical part of the isotope sector now in Canada, so we're privileged to work with them. I think one thing that comes out of this discussion for me is how interesting and robust this topic really is, and we appreciate everyone who's put in some questions. We will make sure that if they weren't directly answered as part of the discussion, we will circulate them with the panelists and get back to you. Just to, again, this is supposed to be a two-way discussion, and I think we could go on for hours. And for that reason, I wanted to also note that in October, a date to be confirmed, so just keep an eye out to the CNIC socials. We will be doing another kind of investment-focused webinar, again with the CMIE. So if you found this topic particularly interesting or had other questions that come to mind thinking forward after hearing the discussion today, I encourage you to sign up for that one when you see it. And then lastly, just a quick programming note on the CNIC side. We will be having another webinar, this time focusing on a completely different avenue within the isotope sector, and that's the skills side of things. So making sure that the workforce is competent and ready and has the necessary competencies to develop the workforce of the future for the broader isotope sector, but also the investment community as well. So thank you, Owen. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you again to the CMIE, of course. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Thank you.